Hey guys, Bryan New here. I'm here with BassResource, and today I'm going to talk about using hard swim baits, different ways of using hard swim baits in the summertime. There's different models of hard swim baits. We can go from glide baits to even some wake baits you can consider a swim bait, because they've got that big profile. And then we've got the multi-jointed baits, like the Sashimi Swimmer. One thing that I have done my entire life growing up fishing locally, I loved catching wolfpack fish. I loved catching cruising fish, brim bed fish. That was my thing. I won a lot of tournaments back home fishing for those type fish. And it's three different types of fish, but they really do a lot of the same things. The brim beds, a lot of times typically get in the backs of pockets. They'll get on sandy places. And that's kind of where I start to look for those brim beds. Now that's, of course, not the only place, but that's the #1 place that I'm gonna look for a brim bed, a bluegill bed. And those bass, of course, they like to eat bluegills. So they're gonna get around them and they're gonna hang out, and when they decide to eat one, they're gonna slide up there and they're gonna eat one. Cruising fish, it can be a single fish that's cruising. It can be a wolf pack that's cruising. And there's certain places I've seen over the years that you would never think it's a bank that you would want to fish. It's just a nothing looking bank, but fishing the same lake over and over, year after year, day after day, you'll notice that this is a cruising bank. And like I said, a lot of times it's those, I'm never going to fish that looking bank. But they like it for some reason. I don't know why, but they do. So the why doesn't always matter. You just got to know that they're there. So one approach that I like to use is, I like to swim a jig. I like to throw a topwater. I like to move a lot of water, cover a lot of water, so I need a fast moving bait. But a topwater and a jig has always been one of my favorites. But you do need different options. A glide bait and a multi-jointed bait are two of my favorite deals for that. Now I'm gonna reach for the glide bait. To me, it is a bait that you can cover water, but it's slower. You can cover, fish a target, a small target, a little better with a glide bait than you can a multi-jointed bait, which is designed more for moving faster. So that glide bait to me on a brim bed is going to be a good deal, because a brim bed to me is a target. It's a small section. It may be the size of, the front deck of your boat. It may be the size of 5 boats. They obviously vary, but it's still a specific target that you're throwing at. It's typically a bunch of little domes in a circle, somewhat of a circle. And the bass will typically sit to the side of it. Of course, the bluegill are on the beds, and the bass will sit to the side. So what I like to do is I'll throw my glide bait up to past the bluegill bed, and I'll just start chopping it. I'll start chopping it, and that bass is sitting to the side looking at all the bluegill there, and here comes this crazy bluegill that looks like he's been doing drugs or something, and he says, "Hey, I need to eat you. You look wounded," and it's an easy target. And it's also a big target, so it triggers a lot of big bites. It's not a bluegill color, but I don't think that it's always important. I think it's the profile that's important. I do have custom painted, Chad shads, and even the perch color Chad shad is a very good bluegill imitator. So for targets, that's when I'm reaching for the glide bait. It's a slower, bigger profile bait. But when I'm really wanting to cover water, when I'm wanting to run as many of those wolfpack cruising banks as I can in a day, to get as many options as I can, because what I've seen over the years, if I see the fish before the fish sees me, and I make the proper presentation to that fish, he's either going to bite or he's not. There's no keep throwing at him and making him bite. He's either going to or he's not. And when he does, obviously you catch him, but when he doesn't, you just got to forget about that fish. Move on. If the rest of the bank, if you know the rest of the bank is good for cruising, keep going until you run out and pull the trolling motor up and go to the next place. Now I may circle back around. I said forget about that fish, but I do remember later in the day, hey, that fish is there. He's cruising up and down that bank. I may go back and maybe come from a different angle. Maybe the wind's picked up. Maybe the sun's at a different angle. Maybe now there's a shade line. All of those different things can make me approach that bank and that fish on that bank from a different angle or a different way. But so one bait that I really like to reach for is the sashimi swimmer, or a multi-jointed bait. There's several different models. Before the sashimi, the triple trout, it's a high dollar, custom made kind of garage bait, but it's a good bait, and that's what I reached for before the sashimi. So with the sashimi though, we're able to get better sizes, we're able to get better colors, and yeah, it's a better swimming bait on top of all of that. But it's a fast moving and it's easy. You just toss it and you wind it. You toss it and you wind it, and it swims really tight. It looks, it looks like a lot of things. Obviously this color is going to look like a perch. This is the killer gill color. I designed this one for fishing cruising fish, fishing bluegill beds. That's where this color really shines to me. Of course, it can look like a shad as well, but when I'm targeting those cruising fish, I'm targeting fish that I feel like are feeding on bluegill more than anything. So I said before, I like swimming a jig, and I like throwing a topwater. I do, I always do. I'll always have those tied on when I'm doing so. But I need another option to show those fish a different presentation, maybe whenever I come back later in the day, or the next day, or later in the next day. I need a different bait to show them, and that may be when I'm gonna reach for the sashimi over the topwater or the jig. Or maybe it's windy and they're just not, it's too windy for that topwater, the buzz bait, or whatever your bait may be. The wind is actually my favorite time to throw this in this scenario where you're catching those cruising fish. Yeah, it's a fast cover, a lot of water with this bait. It looks really good. It catches a lot of big bass. And there's different scenarios where I use this bait away from here, where I do a little bit of tweaking. Maybe it's weighting, maybe it's a feather hook, that type of stuff. I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna take it out of the pack and I'm gonna tie it on, and that's pretty much it. And when I do tie it on, the rod I'm gonna throw is gonna be it's an Arc Invoker Tour. It's a 7-foot 2-inch regular action, so it's got a soft tip rod and it's a medium power. I like that a little bit more, not too long, but a little bit longer rod, make long, accurate casts, because a lot of times I'm throwing around a laydown, or I want to get under that tree that's hanging over, so I can get in that shade line. So a little bit more length for distance, but also not too long, so you're still able to have the accuracy. I'm always reaching for an 8-to-1 Arc gravity reel and 16-pound Sunline FC Sniper. That's my bread and butter setup for the sashimi swimmer. Obviously, if we reach for like the triple trout or the bigger baits of this style, you may have to beef up your equipment, rod-wise especially. But then when we come back to the glide bait, Arc, once again, the Arc Invoker Tour, this is the glide bait special rod. It's a heavy action, 7-foot 10-inch rod. But it's a heavy action, but it's got a soft tip. Once again, same reel, Arc Gravity G7 reel, 6.4 or a 7-to-1. Typically, I'm going to go with a 7-to-1 because I'm trying to cover more water. Yes, it's about the target. I'm throwing the glide bait when I'm fishing a specific target. but I want to chop it and get more of a reaction bite off of that target. So that 7-to-1 is able to allow me to pick up a little bit more line. And I'm reaching, you know, from 20 to 25 pound Sunline FC Sniper fluorocarbon. And the reason I would use 25 over 20 in this situation is obviously it's a bigger diameter line, so it's going to keep the bait up a little bit higher. It's going to not allow it to sink as fast. So we're fishing shallow, you know, well less than 5 feet, a lot of times 1 or 2 feet of water. So you want to keep that bait up off of the bottom a little bit, keep it moving, keep it chopping, grab those fish's attention. You know, those cruising fish in the summertime, bluegill beds, wolfpack fish, it can be so much fun. I won a lot of tournaments growing up on my home lake, Lake Wiley, Lake Norman, and I've done it a lot throughout the country. But hard swim baits, man, you use them the right way in the right situations, and it can catch you the biggest bass of your life. It can catch you, you know, the biggest bag of the tournament, so you can win that tournament. Man, it's a really fun way to fish, and just swim bait fishing in general is kind of like an addiction. You know, it's us as fishermen, we geek out on all these different baits, but swim baits it's a different deal. I don't know how to describe it. For me, it's just it's like the sports car of fishing tackle. So try those tips out this summer. Find those bluegill beds, find those wolfpackers and those cruisers, and man, it's a lot of fun. And yeah, I'm probably going to slide up this bank and see if I can see one cruising.